The following opinions expressed in this program are that of Noah Waterman and do not reflect those of any other
Guys, that can't be right. Can we try that again?
The following opinions expressed in this program are that of Noah Waterman, his guests, his parents, your uncle, your auntie, your fourth grade teacher, that guy that brings his iguana to the park, the state of Mississippi, the Brian Setzer Orchestra, three babies in a trench coat, you, yes, you, in the red and blue striped polo. It's him.
This is the best game of all time.
Well, welcome one, welcome all to a very special edition of the best game of all time. I am your host, Noah Waterman, and this is Masterpiece Gaming. Friends and folks, this is of course the best game of all time. I'm your humble host, Noah Waterman, your boss monster, if you will. And this is episode 8 of our podcast where we rate, rank, and review every game ever made. And I gotta say, I am so happy that you are joining us for this episode. Ecstatic. I'm bouncing off the walls proverbially because, really two reasons. First off, I am lucky enough to be joined by the wonderful people behind RNG Tea. It's an amazing podcast turned Twitch stream with some awesome people, Sarah Lloyd and Christine Kooky Solace. Unfortunately, the latter of whom was not able to join us last minute, which is unfortunate, but we had a great chat with Sarah and Lloyd. With regards to the second reason why I'm so excited for this podcast is because we're talking about two of the best stories in gaming, two of the best, most epic tales given out there. If you listen to the last episode, you know at the end we told you what it was, guys. We are comparing Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. Two games that, quite frankly, are regularly at top Super Nintendo games of all time, top RPGs of all time, top gaming stories, ones that have withstood the test of time, withstood awful remasters to still be considered definitive in their own way. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I am stoked. It was great to revisit these, and it's going to be a bit of a love fest. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be a bit of a love fest, as there's a lot to love about these games. Not everything. There are things to dislike too. We get in that as well. Guys, if it's your first time here, if you've never listened to this podcast before, well, let me clue you in. In this podcast, I and some panelists come together to play and review games. We take these games from the modern era to historical importance to random schlock found in the walls of a Blockbuster, and we compare them all to each other. The idea is that no game can be rated the same. We have a rating we can only give once in perpetuity, and after that, in any future podcast episode, that rating is given away, never to be used again. And it creates some interesting conundrums as this list grows. Currently, the list is at 26. After this episode, we'll be at 28. Guys, we're almost at 30 games on the list, and we'll probably surpass that very soon. So I'm not going to wax any more poetic than I need to. I'm not going to waste your time. You're already listening to me enough, and you're going to listen to me a whole lot more on this podcast. Let's just dive in to episode 8 of the best game of all time. I honestly, like I said, running on maybe 3-4 hours of sleep tops, just last night alone. This will be fun, guys. This will be.
I love unhinged comment. I love unhinged content. Lloyd can tell you.
Oh, for sure. That's our entire podcast, anyway. So.
Pretty much. So don't even worry about it.
Beautiful. Then all I can do is kick in and compare. Friends and folks, welcome to the best game of all time, the only podcast that dares to do the unrequited, the undeterred, nay, dare I say, and I swear to God, I wrote this in my script before you even mentioned it, unhinged task of reviewing, rating, and ranking every game ever made. A lofty goal, not just to represent my thoughts, the thoughts of our guests, but the thoughts of every person, past, present, or future, to decide what truly is the best game of all time. Before we get into that game, it is important to mention that I am not alone right now. Like Chrono jumping through time or Sabin washed up on shore, I have some adventurers joining my party with their own Texan skills to lend me their aid. Allow me to introduce to the podcast, for the first time, 2/3 of the fantastic folks from RNG Tea. First, when not sipping tea with the crew, you can find her on Cloaks and Capes or Fuck My Final Fantasy Life, amongst other D&D projects. It's Sarah, not a thief, a treasure hunter. How you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm just so, honestly, you guys picked two great games. We'll get into that. I'm just so excited to be able to talk about this. Next up, along with joining Sarah on her various D&D projects, you can find him on Let's Play Daily Gaming News, Limit Break Radio, in WDET's One Update. He's the only VTuber I've ever met not to be a kawaii cat girl. It's Mr. Thou himself, Lloyd. Lloyd, what's going on?
It's going, and thank you for shouting out my many, many projects.
Of
He's
course,
very
look,
busy.
we all got to hustle, and I got to say, it's a laundry list, so good for you for even keeping that up.
It's a long time, every day.
Oh, jeez, I bet. And of course, I want to shout out Christine Solis, who's not able to make it to this recording tonight. We're thinking of her. She had to play these two wonderful games for nothing. Oh, well, I'm sure she'll survive somehow. But as we've alluded to, we've got a pretty hefty episode today. So when I initially brought this up to you guys, I asked what games you wanted to play. And you guys had decided to go all out, to reach for the stars, to take on what many consider to be gaming's answer to War and Peace, to the Odyssey, to a third book of importance. We are taking the lofty goal of comparing Chrono Trigger to Final Fantasy VI. Two games that, quite frankly, could have their own podcast series about them. This won't be easy, but it will be fun. Yet before we dive into these S-tier stories, we got a little segment we call Get to Know Your Panel. Get to Know Your Panel is a segment to help you, the listener, get to know the voices and opinions behind today's episode. Sometimes it's a question for just one person. Sometimes it's a question for the whole group. This one is, in fact, for the whole group. All two of you. RNG Tea is a place to talk about life and video games, sometimes even over a cup of tea. My question to you all is, which character from either of today's games would you want to have a tea party with, and where from their worlds?
Let me think.
That's a
Think about
good
this very
question.
large cast of characters.
God, there's so many people from just 6 alone. Let me think. I would love to have a tea party with Luca from Chrono Trigger. And I would like to do it. I think I would want to do it. I'm trying to think. It's not technically in the game, but I don't know, somewhere in the future, but before 2300, I just feel like she would be able to discuss some of the technologies there with lots of detail.
The city domes are all in existence, but nothing's blown up yet, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
She could tell me about before things really start to get screwy.
Right.
Just about the fun technology.
Where you could heal up in one of those pods, but you won't be hungry still. That's like, yeah.
But you're still hungry.
So sad.
I know, and the sound effect every time gets me. But I think she would be so much fun to have tea with, even if she probably would try to figure out a way to make the teapot just magically make tea on its own. Not magically, technology.
Yeah, and talk, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yes. So she's
awesome. Pick. Love that, Lloyd.
See, I would probably. Can I pick any character within the games?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the playable ones. Ooh.
Okay.
Okay.
Then
Yeah.
I pick
I'm into this.
Kefka. Kefka would probably be my tea partner, to be honest, because I want to sit down with him and go, what drives you as a person other than power? Like what's going through your head? I would rather get that perspective than to like talk to 9 different heroes who had the same journey that I just experienced. I want to know what's going on in his head.
I'd like to have tea with Joker. I get it.
Yeah, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, and hopefully come out the other side of it. And I think that's
if I don't, it's still a great question to ask him. So
honestly, it didn't go well for other people who drank things he's provided. So you got to be a little careful about that.
True.
Too soon, I know.
Too soon.
Also, I was thinking about because I asked you guys, I didn't thought my own answer, but I would definitely, at least for myself, Setzer 100%, because I think he's a messy bitch. He probably is. It's probably an absolute blast on his airship, and just him spilling the tea on everybody would probably be fantastic.
That's very true. And
take him to the casino, get some money.
Yeah.
He probably has some crazy
stories. He's seen it all. to be
seen
that
it
young and still
lived
have
it.
gray hair, like I'm sure he's fantastic.
Oh wow, yeah.
All right, well God, this is good. There's so much to talk about here. I fucking love these 2 games. So let's jump in. We're going to go ahead. We're going to start with one at a time before we start really diving into comparisons to each other. And we're going to kick it off with Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is a top-down RPG developed and produced by Squaresoft and released in 1995 for the Super Nintendo. The game follows the story of Chrono, Marl, and Luca, 3 young heroes from the present who get whisked away to various eras in the past and future, meet a colorful cast of party members, and venture on an epic quest through time to stop a world-ending entity named Lavos. This instant classic featured many innovations, including replacing random encounters with enemies you can see, double and triple tech moves, an active time battle where enemy placement matters, and the introduction of New Game Plus, a concept that has made its way into basically every AAA game of the modern era. The game sold 2 million copies in 2 months in Japan and received near perfect scores from critics and players alike. To this day, it is widely considered one of the greatest Super Nintendo games of all time. But is it one of the greatest games of all time? Before we look into the future, let's look into the past. It's all apropos for this game we're talking about here. Guys, do you have any, before playing this game for the podcast, do you have any memories, feelings, emotions, experience with this game, either at its initial release or the many down the line re-releases on PlayStation and such that came afterwards?
So I did. I didn't play it like immediately when it came out. I think I would have been too young. But I actually grew up with both Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross as staples in my house, which I know is very controversial to have any positive feelings for Chrono Cross, but I stand by it.
You had 2 unrelated games. Wonderful.
Listen, they connected at the end. They tried. God. Anyway, but so for me, there's a lot of parts of Chrono Trigger that I've always really liked. I love multiple endings, more in visual novels, I will say, but I've always liked that aspect. Just even the smaller cast, not so much in Chrono Cross, but we're not going into that. With it, even the music itself is always I'm not sure if I would say the music is necessarily better than Final Fantasy VI, but we'll get to that later. But it is very much music I am super familiar with. Especially the remakes with everything else. So that was like music I used to listen growing up. So for me, even though it was a long time ago that I played it, definitely there was a matter of that this was very familiar to me going back into it, even if I wasn't as good the second time around or having as much patience as I used to.
Right.
So.
But the memories were still there. The nostalgia kicks in, and all the feels kind of come into place, right?
For sure.
Wonderful. Lloyd, how about you, man?
See, for me, like, I'm probably kind of unique that I actually never played Chrono Trigger up until this point. Like, I had a Super Nintendo, but never had it Like, it wasn't available at any, like, Hollywood Video or Blockbuster when I was growing up. And, like, every store that we went to never stocked Chrono Trigger. And I just never heard of the game up until, like, 2005-ish. So, like, I kind of came to it really late in my life, so...
Wow. I would say renting a game like that is always tough, right? Because I remember the number of times I've tried to rent an RPG and there were just other people's random saves, and as a kid I didn't know better to not play those and start my own, so you'd be thrown in the middle of the story. I think it's something like that. Like Chrono Trigger, great game, but it'd be impossible, I feel like, if you did find it at that Hollywood Video or something, to then try to play from that. That seems like a lofty goal in its own right.
Oh, I grew up with that era of, like, renting games, so, like, I always just, like, restarted everybody's saves on those games, or sometimes, and you can't do this anymore, I would actually switch out the games for different games so I could keep it longer. So when we did go return it, they would get, like, Yoshi's Cookie, and I would keep Final Fantasy 3. Like, yeah. So
Lloyd over here
I was
needing
that
crimes.
kid.
Honestly though, because I did that's how I got Mutant League Football for Sega. So like I'm right there with you. I totally understand how that worked. It'd be really worth it because you didn't want to burn bridges in places, but like absolutely it was the way to go.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Y'all are nuts. I could never.
It's like take a penny, leave a penny.
Yeah, that's more like take a penny, leave a Canadian penny.
True.
Still worth the same somewhere. Great. So you got into it later down the road and stuff, and you enjoyed it then?
To be perfectly honest, like, I didn't play through it a whole lot because it was on, like, a friend's Super Nintendo. So, like, I got through maybe the first little bit of it and then never picked it up again until this podcast, to be perfectly honest.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't even know about the story until I actually finished it for this. So...
Oh, boy.
Other than that, like, it's an interesting story, but, like, I'm more objective on how it's told instead of having all that nostalgia, like, kind of clouding my judgment on it. So I might end up rating this a little lower than most people.
I think that's totally valid, and like it's cool to have that perspective, because it's a perspective, especially doing older games, people rarely get. I don't know. I feel like hearing you say that you got to experience the story of Chrono Trigger for the first time is kind of like you didn't see Star Wars until last year. It's like, it's just one of those stories, at least for myself, is so ingrained. I know it's such a loved game that, like, being able to come into it blind, on one hand, I envy you. At the same time, it's like, oh, you probably can see the seams in everything.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And we'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into it. I love it, but I get it.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, you know what, though? That's your past with it. Let's talk about the present. Let's get into it now. Lloyd, for a first-time player, first-time experience this, what did you think?
The story, the little bit of story that is actually told through the game, because there's really not that much dialogue, if you actually break it down, is interesting on the face. And I think this game would actually benefit from, like, a Final Fantasy VII remake, if that makes any sense, like a reimagining in 3D to kind of flesh out those parts that weren't really like touched upon in the Super Nintendo, because they really didn't have the space back then, or the writing teams that most of these games have nowadays. So from that aspect, like, it was interesting, but like the story itself didn't really catch me up until you actually go and kill Lavos, if that makes any sense. Like, none of the interpersonal things that were happening didn't go deep enough for me, like they do in modern JRPGs. And I think that's what kind of... Yes. It felt kind of forced, and like you didn't really learn these characters in the time that you actually played, even though I probably did speedrun this game in 29 hours. So,
whew.
Yeah.
I guess for something like this, you kind of beeline it a little bit, but I hear you.
Oh, yeah. But in that aspect, like I would have loved like a little bit more character development. I think one point in the game that really sticks out to me is when you lose Chrono and you have to go get his doppelganger. Like that entire, like I didn't see the point of that in a lot of ways because it just felt like here's a 5-minute quest to get Chrono back. But you're really, like, there's really no stakes at it. Like, you're going to get him back no matter what. Because if you don't, you're not going to progress. So, like, things like that where I know they could have taken the chance of, like, you're going to lose the main character for the rest of the game if you don't do this, would have been better, in my opinion.
Interesting.
The other aspect that kind of, like, ruined my experience with Chrono Trigger is the battle system. Like, I like active time battle systems, but for Chrono Trigger not to have, like, a waiting system for your turn kind of made the battle system feel like you were always rushed to do something. So once you're fully leveled up and you have all these abilities, like, you have to, like, just scroll through these menus as fast as possible so you don't die in some fights, which really took away from the battle experience, in my opinion.
Interesting.
So,
I'll be honest. I actually kind of liked that aspect of it because for me there was a bit of that arcadey. Gotta think fast. I gotta be while I'm seeing that bar. I have to be deciding what it is. But I don't disagree with that. I definitely get where you're coming from. Even if I felt a little different about that. I think it's a worthwhile take because I can see how that could feel annoying in some capacity.
Well, and it could be just that I'm more of a Final Fantasy player. I've played most of the Final Fantasies, and like their turn-based system has always been like, we'll wait for your turn to come up. Or in 6, when we're going to talk about it, like the monsters still attack, but they don't attack after that until you select what you're going to do. There's a turn order and all that.
Yeah.
Which is like visualized in like Final Fantasy X, if that makes any sense. So
right. Fair enough. Sarah, how about you coming back to this game after so long playing through it?
So I disagree with Lloyd. I'm just kidding. No, I quite like Chrono Trigger's layout because I actually will get into it. I don't have a ton of Final Fantasy experience, including none with 6. So for me, the active time part. Now I will say, Lloyd was not aware until we had talked a few minutes before that there is a setting you can put in to have kind of it waiting a little bit for you. But regardless, it is still an active time battle system. Monsters can still keep attacking if you haven't chosen something soon enough.
Yeah, I think wait just makes it more similar to Final Fantasy VI, right?
Basically, how if I recall correctly, once you like select from your initial menu, like attack, tech, whatever, and it opens up, that opening up pauses everything. Right, but when you're just in the main menu, it's still, everything keeps going. Which is why, hilariously, because I did turn on the wait function, because I also sometimes worry I'm not going to pick fast enough, but I almost actually had to go back and turn it back on, because my problem is I'd be waiting to do dual text, and I'd be like, oh, when I click the menu, that doesn't keep going. So I have to so that was pretty funny. But anyway, all of that to say, so I do agree with Lloyd that for sure the story and the dialogue is pretty sparse, and I do think it just suffers from the fact, and this was normal back then, you have a silent protagonist. And I think nowadays that's just not something we do, which is, I think, a growth in the video game industry. But it definitely was a thing back then. And I do think that does cause some kind of weirdness sometimes with the character interactions, just because of how important Chrono is to the story. I feel differently about like his death, but I do understand that there could have been more to that. I will say you can, because I'm not sure if you knew this, Lloyd, but I guess I'll say for the sake of the audience, part of what makes Chrono Trigger so special is you can end the game almost at any time, meaning you can go defeat Lavos almost at any time in the game, including really early on to get different endings, because when you kill Lavos determines the kind of ending you get. Technically, you can just go try to kill Lavos without bringing Chrono back. So, not quite the same as stakes, but it is an interesting thing.
I think specifically that's through the New Game Plus, because at that point they give you the extra portal, to kind of attack him at any point in time, and then you keep all your gear and stats and stuff, so you could play as far into the game as you want, and then attack Lavos. And when you do that, yeah, you get some really great, some really fucking bonkers endings.
Some really weird endings.
My personal favorite is the one where you get to meet the developers just in sprite form, walking around the place. It's stuff like that makes there those kind of elements where it's like, it's a pretty hefty game, but then those things are like, it does not take itself seriously at all. No. And there's some real goofy moments in there, both in the endings, but also during the entire game. Like I think some of Akira Toriyama's best like art style shows up in some of the reactions of when you hit those little rat creatures and they all get all bug-eyed and stuff. It's like, they definitely have vibes where it lends itself to being a little sillier than, say, Final Fantasy VI did, even if that had its own sense of humor here and there.
Yeah, and I like that aspect. I like that everyone's sprites were different and that everyone had different, just even art and reactions and things like that. And it's a smaller cast. So, you get there, even though there's not a ton of dialogue, thank goodness there weren't more to be able to give attention to that. So, I mean, to me, like, when I say does it still hold up, I think for sure that's hard to say, because I do agree that the story is not quite as in-depth as I think they could have made nowadays. I think it'd be awesome if they did some true kind of Final Fantasy VII remake. They probably won't, but that would be really cool, because I think I could see how they do that. But I still love the art. I still love the music. I do enjoy the battle system. I'm not sure why, but I do. It's just fun. I like how everyone works together and they have different things, like the dual techs and stuff like that. That's very satisfying for me. So for me, I still think as far as like as a game, like I'm not saying it's necessarily the greatest thing ever. I think it definitely has some problems, but I still think it was fun going back to it.
I'll say this, it's like in general, it's hard for me not to want to jump into comparing the two now, so I'm only going to do bits and pieces because there's just so much there. And this could be a very long podcast if I allow it. But I'll say first off the battle, I definitely found myself being less bored during combat and more active, doing the active style in Chrono Trigger. Then I think the combat in Final Fantasy VI maybe doesn't hold up as strongly for myself now as an adult. I also want to go back to the idea of the silent protagonist thing. Sarah, I think you were saying earlier that it's not something that's being done that often now. And you're right, for the most part, with big story games like this, we don't. But I do look at things like the two that are the first two on the top of the list at the moment for the podcast are Zelda Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring. Two very great games, two very silent protagonists. And so I think it can be done, but those are more newer games. Those benefit from voice acting by all the NPCs and the other characters, so maybe that has something to do with it. Having a silent protagonist means a lot less when you're just reading. So, I think there's an element there to it. I definitely even was reading that there was a bit of a battle between, I forget who took what side, but two of the three members of the Dream Team that made up the leading development crew on Chrono Trigger fought over whether Chrono should or should not be silent. And the one who wanted, obviously, the silent protagonist won out. I wonder how that would have affected this game differently had Kronos been a talker.
Yeah. It is an interesting thought, just because I do feel like some parts of, or just even how the characters would react to Chrono in general, I feel like might be interesting. I kind of think of it in terms of almost like how Final Fantasy VII looks in that way, but either way, I do think it'd be different. I can't say if it'd be better. I think I would have liked it better, but I also don't know because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, the world will never know.
Exactly.
Well, I think with silent protagonists, you brought up Elden Ring, for instance. A lot of the lore is told through item descriptions and just discovery of the world, which Chrono Trigger doesn't have. So like, I don't think it would be an apt comparison to that game entirely, just because of the way they kind of took the dialogue from the character or from interactions with NPCs and put it into item descriptions, which, to be honest, would have probably been a great asset to Chrono Trigger if, like, certain items had more of a lore implication and was told, like, Frog's Sword, for instance, Masamune, was probably the biggest item in that game that actually had lore behind it.
Yeah.
So, like, if we had more of that interaction, it could have probably bridged some of the gaps that I have with the story itself. So,
I mean, and I think to your point, I think honestly a lot of games could probably benefit from that form of I don't know what to best call it, less egregious storytelling, right? It's not in your face, it's not given to you. You have to seek it out. Show not tell, 100%. And I think Chrono Trigger's world is very interesting because we get to not only see but live its history in a way that not a lot of games do. And to your point, Lloyd, I think it would have been great if they leaned more into that and the environmental side of the storytelling of, like, you know, the show, not tell, and, like, give us more about the world by virtue of seeing the evolution of things. I think it's very face value, but I think that's also just the era, Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
and also, like, let us not forget, it's an era of censorship and translation. A lot of things get lost in the American version when they get sent out globally that aren't censored in the Japanese version. And I've heard, I've never played it, but I've heard there are, like, fan translations out there that are closer that kind of open up a little more for both games to make some of the lines. What's the famous one from Final Fantasy IV? You spoony bard, as an insult, right? Like, it's, yeah. Silly decisions get made for the sake of translation and censorship. So I always curious about how much do we lose, down the pipeline when that stuff like that happens.
Yeah, it's very true. I think overall, Lloyd, what I hear from you is the game has potential, just didn't quite live up to when you go back to it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not saying it's a bad game. I'm just saying, like, it does, like, it could benefit from a little bit more. It would be a great game in my eyes if it just went over the edge a little bit.
Yeah, it's almost too bad that a story, even if it's not a remake of Chrono Trigger, I wish a story like Chrono Trigger could be made in the modern era, in a way. Just that idea of exploring different worlds of timelines and having to jump between those timelines to, save the day of some kind, and trying to explore all of that. I think that's another reason I really like Chrono Trigger. I've actually always been a big fan of mystery games, and there is kind of a mystery element to it, despite being a JRPG of, like, what's going on, what caused this, what is this. And I think that's one of the reasons I like the story, even if it is a little thin, because there is kind of this mystery aspect for me.
Yeah, you really get kind of thrown in there not knowing much, and the sense of discovery in the game is pretty great. And, the environment, I think, I was talking about the things they're missing in the environmental storytelling, but the atmospheric storytelling, which I'm going to say is different than the environmental side, the atmospheric storytelling of, like, how the music and weather effects come together. I mean, that first time you get thrown into the future and it's desolate. And, like, I'll say this from the perspective, I still got the chills, I think, playing it now, because it feels very dark and sad, and so it's the first time you're seeing that tech stuff in a lot of ways. But as a kid, I remember being like, this is not, video games don't look like this. This is all, like, sepia and brown. And there's barely music playing. Just, it's just the snow scene from Narsh playing here in Chrono Trigger. And, like, it's weird. And, like, especially at that time, especially in that era, like, getting that level of atmosphere in games was still so cool, and I think something that can get taken for granted now, especially when a game can still, at least in my opinion, still hold that up.
the music in Chrono Trigger is phenomenal. I didn't look up who the composer is, but they took what the Super Nintendo could do to its like height, and I would even say that rivals what was it Uematsu?
So Uematsu was part of it, but the main one was Yasunori Mitsuda, and I think she actually. Anyway, they are incredible. They also did Chrono Cross music, which is phenomenal.
And I believe Chrono Trigger was their first game as a composer. They've been trained as I was watching something about this. They were trained as a musician, but he was trained as a musician, but then hired to do general development stuff. And I think he walked in the room being like, "Screw this! I know how to do this. This is what I'm here for." And one of the creators was kind of like, "Okay, go for it. Here's the project." And Uematsu came in and stepped in, I think, on like 8 different tracks. Uematsu's in there, but most was just him. And I mean, the Wind theme, which is like one of the first songs you hear on the overworld map, it's such a great, soft kind of feel. There's something very almost Ghibli-esque in its wistfulness of some of the music in this game.
Oh, for sure.
I think what you're hearing is, I believe, and I'm actually trying to look on a wiki to see if this is right. I believe I've heard that he has taken elements of like Irish Gaelic or Celtic music as part of like his work with Chrono Trigger, and I believe that's what you're hearing. Actually, that sort of kind of wistful feeling. I believe that's where he got some inspiration in that. I mean, it's crazy.
If so, great. Like what a way to go, and it fits the game so well. For it fit, to take musical inspiration, like Gaelic musical inspiration, and combine it with the very Japanese anime look of Akira Toriyama and make it work. Credit to them.
That's why I tease that Chrono is Irish Goku sometimes, because he's got red hair and green eyes.
Love that. What are the moments in this game? Because these are both large epic stories. What are the moments in this game that stand out to you? We're going to say, I think we've already gone in a little bit into it, so spoiler alert for a nearly 30-year-old game. But what are the story beats, the moments of the game that like really stand out to you as something that like still either sticks with you from the past or in the case of your first playthrough that like you're like, oh, that really got me. That's memorable for me.
For me specifically, I think it's the frog scene when he actually takes up Masamune and he cuts that rock in half. Like, that's where the game started to feel real to me. It wasn't just like this weird jaunt into the past or whatever. It's like these characters actually have power within this world, that they actually can change what's happening within the world. And that kind of stuck with me because like Frog is probably my favorite character in Chrono Trigger, to be fair.
Oh, 100%.
Just his story
100%.
What a great character.
Fleshed out the best.
No objections here.
Like even the scenes with him fighting against why can't I remember the dude that was working for Lavos and he becomes your party member?
Magus.
Yeah.
Magus. When he was fighting Magus up on the waterfall and all that, that's another memorable scene. And like actually getting to see the backstory of Frog before he was turned into a frog was probably the best storytelling that game offered, in my opinion. And I wish there was more of that. But like, I don't know. What about you, Sarah?
So I love that because I love Frog. He's my favorite, besides Luca, because I have a soft spot for Luca. But so I definitely agree with that. For me, really, the whole I think it's 1200 BC? No, 1200 AD. Which one is it? The magic time, Magus' time.
Oh,
line, basically.
yeah.
I don't know why I never can remember if it's BC or AD, but I think it's BC. Because it's way in the past, I think. Anyway,
do they say
weird.
what BC and AD stands for in the game? Because there's no Christ, right?
No, they just use those terms.
They just use it.
They just use it. Everybody knows what that means, I guess.
Is it before Chrono?
I think Chrono... Maybe, but I think Chrono Trigger is based on a fantasy version of Earth, so it could still mean before Christ. And
it could be, yeah.
Could be
similar.
Fantasy Christ, yeah.
Fantasy Christ.
Right.
Just not Chrono this time. But the whole, like, to me, going into the sky cities and stuff and talking to these people, so eerie to me. Like, the 2300 part was so also eerie because it's like, whoa, what just happened? And you find out like, oh, this is the end of the world. But that part was really eerie for me. Just that really sticks out. Just talking to everybody and talk about wanting to live forever or dream their life away in paradise. And it's just, oh. And of course, anything like regarding Shala always, Magus' sister always tugs at my heartstrings a little bit because gosh, what a terrible position to be in with everything. So it kills me every time. So that to me, I think was a very, like, just talking to the people, that kind of storytelling I thought was really powerful and eerie. So to me that sticks out. Even though Chrono's death was maybe not as significant as it could have been, I do think when he's brought back, I think there's a lot. It's depending on which party members you bring. Because I made sure to bring Marl, even though she wasn't as powerful as Frog and Robo for me. But that's fine. But I still brought her along to get to that part. And when she's there, it's really meaningful. So
that's great. Did you guys both choose to add Magus to the party?
I did.
I did as well, yeah.
Yeah, say I do every time. I also feel shitty about it every time.
I know. Frog was in my. The reason is Frog was in my party when I had to make the decision. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do one-on-one fight because he does a one-on-one fight if you say no. I'm like, nope, just come join the fight.
No, I'm always like the storyteller in me is just like, no, I don't want him to join me. But then the gamer in me is like, oh, but I'm sure he's powerful and it'd be useful in my party.
Yes, he is.
Even if, like you, I did basically main Frog and Robo 90% of the time. What do you guys feel about one that sticks out to me, and I'd love to get your thoughts on, is the courtroom scene and the ensuing dungeon. It's such a different, especially in a game that is almost always in one perspective. Both the courtroom and the dungeon, when crossing through, completely change perspective without changing the sprites. And it's cool to see. And that's where I think between the courtroom and the stone dragon on Magus' tower in the moonlight, like two moments where it's like, oh, they really went all out in the art for this guy. What'd you feel about that courtroom scene?
So I remembered that courtroom scene from when I first played. So when I was playing it again, I was like, okay, don't touch the food. Okay, do not touch the pendant. I was mad at myself because I had forgotten I was like, Marl, why are you taking so long? Oh, right, I can't rush her. God. The stupid cat. I almost had a perfect score. I was missing one. I forget what I did wrong. Yeah, I was missing one. But yeah, so to me, what I think is so fun is like, you're just used to as a character, in a JRPG, just walking around, clicking on things, taking things, talking to people, doing whatever, and getting the shiny item and stuff like that, and it just punishes you for it. And it's such a funny, like, it's like Link breaking all the pots. It takes a little bit of that like JRPG motif and just kind of twists it a little bit, but it was way back then that they did it. I think it's really funny. That
you bring up a good point on that. The idea of really playing with the player's expectations of what they're supposed to do in an RPG. Oh, something's shining in the corner. I meant to grab that. That's an item. I'm meant to be the hero who grabs it and helps her out. Like, oh, I can move around right now. I guess I need to talk to somebody to continue on to the next thing. It's like, I'll be honest, totally forgot totally 100% forgot about the court screen in general. And so once I got there, I went back and they started bringing up the first thing. And I'm just like, fuck me.
I was in the same mode. I did everything.
Oh, it's so funny.
Like, I'm going to jail. This game's going to end really quick.
Yeah.
Chrono is hanging somewhere in the city square.
God. Yeah, thankfully it doesn't matter. But I will say the only thing that's kind of too bad is it's almost too bad that was so early on in the game, because if it weren't for the fact that I was aware, if I had just experienced that, I would be in the mode of, I can't open any chest. I can't do anything. Which, to be fair, the game doesn't have a ton of like there's chests and stuff like that, but especially compared to 6, I feel like a lot of the chests are like outdoors, not always like it's in the castle, I guess, but there's not a lot of stealing chests from people's houses as much. So
there aren't as many chests for chest's sake in Chrono Trigger. I feel like you see chests where you kind of expect to see chests.
Yeah.
Whereas Final Fantasy, they'll throw in people's. In an opera house, they'll throw them, in the middle
Check
of somebody's
all the
lawn.
clocks.
Well, yeah, every fucking... Who's storing shit in their grandfather clocks? Come on now. That is obviously not a safe place to put it, especially... Who leaves their doors wide open? Why am I walking into people's homes? That's freaky. In a town... My mom does that, and she lives in the middle of fucking nowhere. That's a whole dude. That's okay, but not like here.
My favorite's when it's in the shop.
And they're happy that you came in.
Yeah, unannounced, uninvited.
I kick them out.
I love a Super Nintendo RPG where you play as a vampire. You just have to stick outside until someone invites you inside.
That would be quite the game. Someone get an idea down.
A lot of active waiting. All right, we only have so much time, and there's so much to talk about here. I want to move on to the next game, but before I do, and before we move into comparing the two, any final thoughts, real quick, on Chrono Trigger that we didn't get into?
Not much. I will say, hey, at least when you don't have your party members, they still slowly level up with you. Looking at you, Final Fantasy VI. Anyway,
yes,
that's all.
True. Like the Pokemon style of leveling up. It's like, it is nice to know that something's still happening, because I love big ensemble piece games, but that means I want to see everybody in every scenario and take them all with me. And like every time I have a chance to stop somewhere, I'm going to change party members just so I can keep that going. And having them level up when I'm not around is exactly the kind of thing games should be doing. There's no, I don't care about fucking realism. If they're getting experience from reading a book at home, that's fine. I want that.
Exactly. Agreed.
For sure.
But yeah, now on to 6.
On to 6, Final Fantasy VI, or 3 in the US, which made talking about this game a fucking nightmare in the 90s, is a Super Nintendo role-playing game developed and published by Squaresoft in 1994. The first in the series not to be directed by Hironobu Sakaguchi, the man who also spearheaded the creation of Chrono Trigger. The role was instead filled by the first-time directors Yoshinori Kitase and Hiroyuki Ito. Set in a more steampunk style, the story revolves around an ensemble cast of 14 playable characters through a tale of rebellion, diplomacy, loss, and hope. The game wasn't considered a success in the US, becoming the 8th best-selling game on the system that year, but was huge in Japan, easily taking the #1 spot. Another standout with critics, it arguably ushered in an era of RPGs that have greatly influenced every game in the genre since. Guys, same question we kicked off Chrono Trigger with. Historically, what were your initial experiences and exposure to this game?
So, opposite of Lloyd, I did not play this game when I was younger. So for me, this was the first time. I will say I'm a huge Final Fantasy XIV player. And wow, I see where the ideas came from. There's a song played in there that's just a zone song in 14 that threw me off guard. Because I was like, I know this song, what?
Oh, wow.
So Yeah, I think it's Doma, and Doma in 14 as well exists. But I don't know if it's Cyan's theme or just Doma's theme. But yeah, it's that song.
Oh my god!
But yeah,
what a great
so
song.
for me, I know. So for me, it's kind of funny to see that of like, oh, that's where they got these ideas from. Got it. But otherwise, no, this was a first timer.
Great, Lloyd. How about you?
For me, my brother was like the JRPG player. He's 7 years older than me. So when we got Final Fantasy 4 or Final Fantasy 6, sorry, on I think it was the PlayStation in the Anthology collection where it had 6 and 5, I believe, or 6 and 4. I can't remember.
I think it was 6 and 4, and then I think was it 4 on Chrono Trigger, then 5 and 6.
4 was in Chrono Trigger, so it might have been 5 and 6.
So yeah, right, I think it's 5 and 6. Yeah.
Okay. And I watched him play through it. I never actually got a chance to play Final Fantasy 6 at a younger age, but like I knew the story beats, if that made any sense, because I watched him play through all of it. And that's kind of how a lot of my gaming experiences up until like until he left the house when I was like 13. And I kind of started exploring these things, but I never really came back to Final Fantasy VI on my own up until now. But I did go back and play like 1, 2, 3, and 5. I think I skipped 4 for some reason. So I'm pretty versed in a lot of the Final Fantasy lore and mechanics, and it's something that I kind of gravitated towards. But with 6, like, it was just one of those games, because like he did the same thing with me on 7, 8, 9, and 10. Like I never played those on my own until much later in my life. So
wow, great. I mean, look, it's I feel like it's a game that captures the imagination. I myself first discovered it I hadn't knew about the game, didn't know when it was released. It was probably, I want to say, an age myself here, 4th grade, 5th grade when the game probably came out. And I remember seeing, being at a friend's house, and I saw he had it. It's like, I saw like GamePro ads for this. Which was a magazine, which was a thing that made a paper that people would read in the 90s. And
what?
I know. I miss them. But had like really...
I do.
In retrospective, really bad ads. The ads were awful because it was all about how cute and adorable a Moogle was and how it would destroy and how tough it really is in real life. It was like very American trying to sell a Japanese game perspective. But I saw my friend's house. He played it. It's like, you might not like it. It's slow. It's a little bit different. And I fell fucking in love with it in that moment. And immediately had to like go out and ask my grandparents to buy the game for me. And I'll be honest, I'm glad I did. I was obsessed with this game growing up to the point where on my second playthrough as a kid, I paused or stopped at every line of dialogue so I could write it down because I wanted to write the Final Fantasy movie, and I already had ideas for who I was casting and what role, and would draw it out. Like that's very much like and like by hand in a fucking notebook. So it's not like that was ever going to be legible, but I absolutely fell in love with this game. I had the guidebook. Mainly so I could see all the various monsters I might have missed, all the pictures of all of them. It was fantastic. But I could go on about my memories. Now that you guys have both gotten to actually play through it, what'd you guys think?
Yeah, so what things that I really liked about it, I liked the ensemble cast. There were main characters, but overall it was not meant to be a main character in it. They really do kind of try to make it. You're not really sure. Because when I first played, I was like, okay, is Terra the main character? I don't know. Locke seems to be here a lot. Oh, wait, Solace is really important towards the end. Like, there's just so much mismatch, and I appreciate that a lot. I feel like mechanically having that many characters really was its downside, because I know I stopped using, especially, like, Cyan and Gao halfway through, because the other ones, there are actual cutscenes you can get with them if you take them with you in a certain stretch of the game. So the other ones just kind of got left behind as a result of using these ones. So that was hard, but I do like that. I liked that every character played differently. Everyone had its own mechanic, basically. I wish the game did a better job explaining what those mechanics are. I'm still not sure if I know what trance does, but it makes things powerful, so I guess I'll use it.
Yeah, I think it's just a buff. I think it's
okay.
that, but I'm with you. It's like I didn't actually, unless it was necessary for story stuff, I didn't take Terra around with me that often because everyone could eventually learn magic, and I had other characters I liked more. But I would keep her if I knew the story was going to be important. Right,
exactly. I totally get it. And so like that, but otherwise, everyone's kind of different shtick was really cool. And I liked how, once you figured out how it worked, how they were actually pretty easy to get into with that. And so that part was really cool. The story overall, there's a lot more detail to the story. There's a lot more cutscenes and things like that. And that part, I do enjoy. I liked that there were real side stories to everybody and how that came together at the end of a very typical power of friendship story. So that part I liked. I think for me, a lot of my issues really just stem to that older JRPGs are hard for me to play. The grinding, expected grinding, the lack of leveling, and that we talked about. Just even like the fact that the little minion monsters, if you weren't careful, could just one-shot kill you. It was really tough on me because it's like, okay, good Lord, there's that aspect. So that part of it was hard for me. I will say from the art perspective, I liked the different sprites, but the towns kind of started looking the same to me. From just a world perspective. So I didn't really feel much of a uniqueness, unless I was like in Gestalt, basically. Yeah. And stuff like that. So that part was a little, there's a lot of story, which I think is good and bad, because I think there's a lot of really good stuff. And then at the same time, there's also a lot of like, okay, there's a lot to click through here. What's happening? So definitely it's one of those that like, I think as a kid, I would have liked this game a lot. I think I would have been very obsessive just like you, because I definitely had that with certain games, but just a little bit harder as an adult, I think now.
No, I think that's totally valid. I'll say, to your point about having all those characters, like honestly, the ensemble nature of this, and I'm going to keep using that because it's the best way to describe this game.
Yes.
Is I feel like it's a drug I've been trying to chase in an RPG my entire life ever again. Because every Final Fantasy after this, even if they were about a group of people, was really about a singular character and his or her, usually his, 3 to 7 friends. Or I go into something like, I don't know if you guys got to play Octopath Traveler at all.
Bits and pieces, but I never finished it. But yeah, that does try to be.
But I do have it.
Okay. I have it. I played through it. I didn't finish it either. It's also very grindy. Love the art style. But that kind of did the opposite thing where because you pick your first character you play as, you pick people up on the way. It almost seemed like it was an ensemble game, but it was a bunch of just main characters. No one really interacted with each other except for optional moments here and there that felt, again, forced. So nothing that truly had the branching ensemble, cast on one hand, but still the singular storyline that truly ties and interacts all these various relationships together. It's why I love playing D&D. It's why I'll enjoy, big casts, a show like Game of Thrones, when a lot of the fun is the interaction of the various characters and worlds. I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine that when you had mentioned that you think Chrono Trigger would benefit from a Final Fantasy VII style reboot, I think you could take the story of Final Fantasy VI and make an HBO fantasy prestige show out of it.
That's so funny you say that. I was going to come on here today and say, I want Chrono Trigger remade and I want Final Fantasy VI a TV show.
Yes.
I was literally... Or I think
Yeah.
actually my initial joke was more of Chrono Trigger should be an anime, but still, same thing. But yeah, no, Final Fantasy VI I think would make a great HBO style show.
And
I would heavily agree.
You could easy enough to add characters like. There's a whole thing that they gloss over where the Elder and Narsha is trying, or Narsha, I don't know how you pronounce these days, is trying to convince the city to fight against the Empire. That's its own B or C plot you could run into. That doesn't involve any of the main characters, but you could flesh out the relationships behind the scenes of Kefka and Leo and Celes before Celes leaves is its own, dynamic plot of like backstabbing and stuff. There is so much there. 3/4 of the way through the game, when the world ends, that is your red wedding episode done. Anyone who doesn't know the game is shocked and awed and like, I can't believe you did that. There's money in it. God damn it! Hire me. Hire me now.
Saying it since you were a kid.
Showrunner. I've been working on the script. Trust me, it's all here. I could finally cast Jim Carrey as Ultros like I wanted to when I was 13. So make it happen.
I love that.
That
so
would be
much.
amazing. I'm not gonna lie.
No, I'd watch it.
He'd fucking kill it.
He would. He totally would.
Yeah. No, I mean, I absolutely love this. Lloyd, I don't think I'm sorry. I started jumping in and going on some non sequiturs. I don't think we got your thoughts on your current playthrough here.
To be honest, like Final Fantasy VI is probably the first Final Fantasy that has a decent non-existential threat villain in the game, in my opinion.
Yes.
Because Kefka, when you first meet him, you're just like, he's just some stupid dumb fuck that's just like screwing around, killing people. You don't really realize like he's going to become this monster of a god towards the end at all, until you get to the point where he actually takes the warring triad. And that point in the game, it kind of solidifies like this is a different Final Fantasy game. And that's kind of a direction that they've taken ever since, where like this grittier story about like just world destruction or sociopathic people is really intriguing in the Final Fantasy series. Yeah. And like you see them really drive home that point in like Final Fantasy VII after that, which is like, I think is the best part of Final Fantasy VI, is it kind of is the basis for a lot of the epic stories that Final Fantasy has had in the last
100%.
two decades.
We would not have 7 without 6. We would not have God, really so much. There's so much out there that I don't think we would have without Final Fantasy 6. I mentioned in the beginning of introing the spot, but like its fingerprints are all over every game in the RPG genre, especially the JRPG genre. And the influence is just, even if not a lot of people, I feel like outside of the gaming community may know about it, it's not the level of popularity of a Mario or truthfully a Final Fantasy VII. But talk about influence, talk about literal game changers. This has to be up there.
For sure. It's like one of those games that, like, if you're a game dev, you need to play. Because if you don't, like, you don't understand why it's, like, influential to the, like, whatever you're making. Because, like, just on the story aspect, if you want to become, like, a game writer, I would suggest, like, actually playing this game. Because the story elements might be a little, like, it suffers from the same thing that Chrono Trigger does, just the era, like not a lot of like dialogue and stuff between a lot of certain points in the game. But if you can get those key points down and actually understand how to use those key points, you could develop a really intriguing story just by using the template that Final Fantasy VI has. And I don't see a lot of game devs like utilizing that in modern gaming, like just kind of seeing what was done and trying to make it just a little bit better, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think, honestly, I see a lot more games that feel like Pixar movies than feel like this did in this sort of huge epic. I mean, I'll comparatively, I just recently finished my way through God of War Ragnarok, and great, huge epic that I think there's a lot of now that I'm talking about it, a lot of similarities in both how those games do storytelling and the gravitas, along with some of the comedy in which they hold themselves. Down to the both that I cried at the ending of both those games. Of course,
for sure.
I'm about to be a new father for God of War Ragnarok. That makes a little more sense. For Final Fantasy, it's just because I cry whenever a bunch of people come together for a common cause, and that ending medley fucking gets me every time. Which, I mean, both these games have great music, but you cannot talk about Final Fantasy VI without talking about one of Uematsu's greatest scores, if not one of the greatest scores, just soundtracks in gaming ever. Speaking of things that hold up, non-remix, original, Super Nintendo sound chip, it still sounds beautiful.
It does.
It still hits hard. Like, that's insane to me that he was able to do that, create something so lasting. How do you guys feel about the music? Any particular tracks that really... Sarah, I know you mentioned Cyan's theme, which...
Yeah.
God, that very sort of Native American-esque kind of vibe to it for the very medieval, sword wielder in a steampunk... It's just genre bending.
Yes, absolutely. That one definitely sticks out. Honestly, most of the characters' personal tracks are usually what I love, so that's always what I gravitate towards. And the battle music. I mean, I think it's really hard to pick, a good, the best Final Fantasy battle music. I even love Chrono Triggers a lot.
Yeah.
So, but it's just classic immediately. It's very good. And yeah, I do agree that the music, even though I wasn't super familiar with the music, I think I knew of it, through 14 or just hearing, Final Fantasy music.
Yeah.
But in general, playing it for the first time, hearing all that music for the first time, it holds up really well. It's very impressive.
For sure. Lloyd?
For me, I'm really partial to really epic starting music or opening music. So that entire sequence with Terra and the Magitek armor and walking into Narsh for the first time is really what builds up for me really good music making. Because if you can catch me with that first song, you have me for the entire track, because I know you're going to keep on upping what you're doing throughout the entire thing. And then you brought up the ending theme when you finally do beat Kefka's battle music is the best battle music in gaming.
Dancing Mad is a masterpiece.
You can't have ending battle music without putting that on the top. And to be honest, when I was replaying it this time around, I stayed in that battle longer than I needed to just to listen to that song again. So Uematsu went above and beyond for Final Fantasy VI, and I wish we could have more of him like that in Final Fantasy, even though he's kind of moved on from that project.
Yeah.
He's getting old too.
He just needs to set up a school somewhere to teach these young bucks how to write RPG music. No, that Dancing Mad. There's that one moment in there where most of the music stops, and it's just kind of the organ by itself that plays. That fucking gets me every time, and both a beauty, but also just talk about a hype track. Absolutely.
Oh, for sure.
Goes nuts. And then you bring up Terra's theme, and that's another one that's I want to shout them out, and I don't remember the YouTube channel's name, so I feel bad about this. But someone who does I think it's just called 8-bit music even, did a whole thing about leitmotifs. and how and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but how
leitmotif. Yeah.
Okay, but and how that like how Terra's theme comes back in so many other tracks in this game, and it pops up in the boss music sometime, and then there's like Celes' theme when you hear it in both kind of the quiet and sort of her general theme, or like the best one, honestly, in my opinion, is the coin toss, where it is, I believe, Edgar's theme, but in this like soft, sad toy piano thing, because they're discussing their deceased father, and the coin toss that allowed Sabin to go, and like the game would not hold. The game's amazing. I don't think it would hold had anyone else done the track. If this was like Donkey Kong David Weiss track and like it did not fit, like those moments would not hit in the same way as just text and sprites.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna I don't go super hyper into it, but Uematsu does music much like kind of that operatic leitmotif style that John Williams does of Star Wars and things like that. They were both, because it's kind of a classical opera kind of thing, and funny enough, the timing of both of them getting famous was at a time when that style of composing for anything was kind of going out of style. And they basically brought it back, Uematsu in video games and John Williams in films. It is this idea of like, an attached, character music and using that in different parts throughout whatever you're watching or playing. It's incredible. I used to study music theory, so to me, I love this kind of stuff a lot.
No, it's so good, and it really is like in the same way that color is important to film. Like you really forget how important music, even at the time, is a game. Music may have been an afterthought, or at least like it helped a little bit. But yeah, that idea of every character having their own theme. I don't know if we see that now, but I think that also helps in make a ensemble cast feel like an ensemble cast, to make each character. It's why everyone has their own theme in fucking wrestling. It's you make everyone feel important by giving them a music and emotion that to attach them. Sarah, you used, I think what I would say is the Pee Wee Herman magic word here in saying operatic. Another thing we can't avoid talking about because it's so iconic is the opera scene. From what I gather, this seemed like it was both your first time playing the opera scene. How did that feel?
Oh my gosh, that was crazy. In a good way. It was just like, it was genuinely kind of, I think, like the Chrono Trigger like courthouse scene. It was very like, oh no, what is this? And only because I was like, wait, I'm supposed to do something? Shit! Just all of a sudden having to play, and I used to do theater, so I was like, okay, I gotta memorize these lines and everything like that.
Nothing to give any poor theater kid heart palpitations. It's like, oh, I have to replace someone. I'm going on stage and I don't know the lines. Yeah. And there's an audience. Exactly.
And just even that they used the song from that opera in later, parts for Celes, especially like Celes and Locke, was like, my heart, my shipping heart.
Yes. Yeah. Lloyd, how about you?
For me, like, it was kind of surreal, like, the way we played these games, because, like, you mentioned Fuck My Final Fantasy Life for Sarah. Both me and her actually play in that D&D campaign.
Yeah.
And we got to perform that in D&D in a different way.
Slightly different way, but yeah, that was... So our GM is heavily inspired by Final Fantasy VI, which was extra hilarious that I played it, because I was like, oh, I see where this came from. I started to see it, especially funny because we had an opera scene. Ultros did arrive, and he literally was having Ultros say the lines. It was pretty fantastic. Anyway, so we did our own. It was a little bit different. It wasn't the exact opera, but we literally did our own opera of all of our characters together. That we were the whole idea is we were adventurous.
Amazing.
Yeah. So.
Oh God.
So that's what sticks out for me for the opera is like I'll always have that moment with my friends. So.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys succeed the first time through, or did you have to do it a couple times?
I succeeded, but I also really studied.
I did it the first time around too.
Yeah.
The first or second time, I got it. Yeah, I think I messed up one thing and I restarted. I was like,
in this past playthrough, I thought I was doing fine, but like I didn't get to the balcony soon enough, which I didn't realize. I don't ever remember was being a problem. So I was doing all the lines, I got all the lines correct, and then like I don't even think I tripped or messed up. I just didn't get to the balcony fast enough, and I was like, oh no, I have to do it over again. That just felt like very anticlimactic, especially knowing that Ultros was about to drop a 10-ton weight on my head later down the line.
Yep.
Favorite character in the game, guys?
I think
That's a hard
Celis is
one.
mine.
Yeah,
That's a really hard
a
one.
lot.
I think I like Celis. I liked her story a lot.
Yeah.
I think I like her and Locke, to be honest with you. I liked them both. But yeah, that's a really hard one to pick.
There are no. I think Strago's a bit of a dud, but in general, there are no duds.
Yeah.
Cyan might be my favorite, or Cyan, because like the whole sequence of him losing his kingdom and his wife and child kind of, it doesn't hit home for me, but those kinds of types of stories I really enjoy because it kind of shows the flaws in man. And like I really like seeing how people actually traverse through those tragedies and see how they come out on top. And it's something that you don't really see explored in gaming a whole lot. Like, there's certain games for, like, God of War, Ragnarok, and the prior God of War reboot in 2016 kind of have that, where Kratos lost his wife in that series, along with the prior series where he lost his wife and child due to his own hands. So, like, but you don't see those motifs played out the same way that, like, was with Cyan. So I think he would be my favorite character out of all. That's fair.
And that scene where you see his wife and kid get on the ghost train, like, which honestly, just saying the word ghost train shouldn't give me emotions. It's a silly fucking word to say, but especially when you've only suplexed it maybe 5-10 minutes earlier.
Yep.
But
for sure,
yeah. It's a heartbreaking scene to see that happen to him, and him running after the train and going away. Again, all of this not in CG, not in animation, but just in the Super Nintendo sprite chip. They do a great job with that.
Well, and I think they really end cap his story really well with his dream sequence, where you actually have to go into his mind and fight his demons for him, and his wife and child are there. It's like, please live on. We live on through you. That was just such a touching point in that story. And it was a good end cap, I believe.
Oh yeah. Oh, let's talk about, because we alluded a little bit, but the world of ruin and that general feeling, right? You go ahead, Kefka unaligns the three statues, and the world ends. First off, I think now it's one of those things where it's like that's probably one of the more famous moments in gaming that we like, kind of like, that going in, Kefka destroys the world. I mean, I'm putting that out there. Did you guys know that going in?
I didn't quite know like that, I guess. I didn't realize it was like a whole other section of the game. I knew he did some bad stuff. I just didn't realize to the extent that you had to play through it. So that was new to me.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, look, the idea that the heroes lose and the villain wins and everyone's destroyed, followed by Celis waking up a year later in Sid's home, who's sick, have to try to feed him. And I don't know, I've heard there's a way to save him, but I've never been able to. And he dies, and you throw yourself off a cliff in sadness. Like, that's heavy shit.
Yeah. And kids played it.
Fucking I played it. I was barely out of elementary school.
Right.
But like, and I'm kind of going beat by beat here. She sees the bird with Locke's, bandana, comes back, and you see what everyone else has been up to. And then some moments are not as strong. Like, all right, you find Gao's just back in the fucking wilds again. I feel like there's enough of a sad story that he does have that like there could have been more to that. That felt like a bit of an afterthought.
Oh, for sure.
I don't even remember with Mog, but I'm sure it's the same. Mog barely had a character to his name in the first place. But things like Terra looking after the orphan children, and the idea that she was asking General Leo before if she could ever find love. She doesn't know if she could because she's half Esper, and finding that love in all these children who she cared for and they care for her. Like again, loss and hope are the two big themes in this game, and they go all out in focusing on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always had a soft spot for the stories of trying to bring the heroes back together again.
Yeah.
And it is, like you said, not every moment is powerful, but I thought it was also an interesting choice to have Celis be the one that has to find everybody again. Because you would think it'd be probably Terra or Locke even, or maybe even Edgar, but no, it's Celis' turn.
But how
really
powerful is that too? Because she's the one that they had to question at one point. Is she even on their side? She worked for the Empire. Like, on one hand, you're right. It's like it's surprising that was a choice, but who else could possibly be a better choice given how they set all that up?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I thought that part is all together just whoo. And then finally where, everybody's like basically saying the lessons they've learned in friendship is power. Trying to basically defeat Kefka's nihilism.
Right.
Which is always, always good.
I gave a little shit to Strago earlier, but I do love that he ends up joining the cult of Kefka, and you have to snap him out of it because and even that is like adds a little character with what is otherwise someone I felt like a last minute addition to the team.
Yeah, agreed. Poor Realm.
God. Yeah, I don't know. There's so much. I feel like I don't want to give away the fact that I'm probably going to rate this game very high, but like there's just so much to it. Are there any? We've showered a lot of love here, and it doesn't seem right to not do the other way around. What are the big sticking points? What are the things story wise, visually, gameplay? We talk a little bit about leveling up parties individually, and maybe it's being a little obtuse at times. What are the pieces that don't work, that work against it, that are going to deduct points from your score?
You brought up the Fanatic's Tower there. Fanatic's Tower is probably the worst part of the game. Like, having to climb that entire tower with just magic. And then if you don't do it right, you're stuck in that boss battle forever. Like, that was not fun.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I remember feeling, and even visually, I feel like it's meant to be like weird and occultish, and really just feels like a jumbled mess of sprites.
Oh, for sure. And like I played through the game with a guide because I didn't really want to miss out on any part of the game for this podcast. So when I was going through the Fanatic's Tower, it's like, you better have all these things before you go and do it. And it's like, and then I get there and I screwed it up 3 times before I actually finished it. So,
oh jeez.
Yeah. And it's just because of the final boss on the tower casting Ultima when it dies. And it, you have to have some weird, put your party members up on Quetzalcoatl or just have re-raise, which I had one character that had re-raise because I got Phoenix really late in the game. So,
oh, jeez.
It just wasn't fun for me in particular, that part of the game.
Yeah, I don't blame you. There are lots of... I'm not super good at JRPGs as far as, like, the battle of attrition you sometimes have to have. And so for me, those were always the hardest parts. And honestly, I guess for me, the hard part about that is there's so much story that when you have these sections that, like, really break it up and take so much time to get through, it's sometimes hard to be like, where was I in the story again? Where are we going? And so that's kind of one of the hard parts is there's so much there, but they're also trying, they have so much they have the grinding elements of the game to get the gameplay going and stuff like that. And that's rough for me.
No, it's a lot. The game does need a lot of grinding, I think, more. I think that's probably, it feels like, in a way that Chrono Trigger honestly didn't. I didn't feel like it needed to grind in the same way. This game, it's like, there are moments there where it's like, all right, I do have to spend an hour or so in this desert before I can move on.
Right. Yeah, that's to me the biggest thing. And again, I think with the art direction, I love what the character sprites look like and things like that, and stuff like that. I just felt the towns were a little bit bland.
They're very samey, I think.
Yeah, but otherwise, yeah. I mean that's the big stuff I think for me, which is pretty big for me, but that's the main stuff.
No, totally. Did you guys both grab Umaro and Gogo for your parties?
Yes, I did. Gogo is useless.
They're the two optional characters.
I don't know if I did actually.
Honestly, my problem was that they both felt like kind of useless. Yeah. Like Gogo as a mimic, it's cool to have. You want to double up, but like in the way that like, Gao is like, I need to fucking memorize every move. Gogo is like, oh, I gotta like really know what I'm doing here. It felt like a more complicated wrinkle than I needed. And then Umaro, you just don't control because he's always berserk.
Yeah, I
see
a lot.
Didn't
pretty
mind
much
the berserk that much.
No,
no, because like he was one of the stronger characters. If you got both his like the blue orb and gave him the berserk ring, like he could pretty much one-shot everything. So he was kind of nice towards the end of the game when you're going through Kefka's castle just to have that extra character.
A meat sponge at that point.
Yeah, he's better than Mog, to be honest, because like Mog, he was one character that I didn't level very much, and he was just a pain in the ass because like the Dragoon characters in that game don't really play that well.
No, yeah. Mago's like all of his fucking dances, like the success rate were far too low for me early on. I
can't stand that. Just immediately, I ain't got time for this. Let me just get the characters I know.
Like I said, as a kid, I mentioned before, Gao was my favorite. I always liked Raised by Wolf characters for some reason, but I felt now it's like impossible to play with him because you have to know all the creatures. I'm a completionist, and so it's like I don't want to spend 2 full human days in the Veldt trying to capture every creature, and then I don't like knowing the names doesn't help me know what the abilities do. And that alone makes like, I'm just choosing at random, try and remember what a carbuncle is. Like, I don't know, or like, hope I get the cat scratch feature, which apparently is like super crazy powerful, but I only got that because I streamed it once and people were telling me I needed it. So like,
I get it. Yeah. I mean, to me, one thing I really was hard about this game was their lack of description about anything. For me, I use Sabin quite a bit just because early on he's very powerful. But I didn't really understand that some of his like special moves were elemental. Yes, like I could see it, but I'm just used to that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But there's no indicator that it is, and so I forget what it was. There's a really early on battle where the guy's like immune to fire or even gets healed by fire, and I was just using Rising Phoenix, and I was like, what's happening? Why is this not working? I was so mad because I didn't know. I just was like, okay. So that's one of the things about this game that's really hard is the lack of information about what stuff does and if it's an element attached to it and things like that. Like, obviously the spells are clear, but like anything else, some of the ways that some of the drills worked for Edgar, I was like, I hope this works. I hope this
Right,
goes well.
right. Did you guys try Phoenix Down on the Ghost Train? That's always been the favorite kind of joke there.
I did use healing potions on the ghosts in the place. I wanted to do the suplex, so I kept suplexing it. I was very
I
entertained by
suplex
it.
a train also.
You gotta. I even made sure to wait to suplex the train and then use Phoenix Down because I just desperately wanted to suplex it, just visually. Oh God, yeah. What two fantastic games, two great games that go great together, which is why we're going to do a little mini segment here I'm calling Compare and Contrast. I want to give I want to give a thing from each game, and I just want you guys to tell me what aspect you like, which one you like better, and why. Some of these are probably going to be a little more obvious than others, but let's give this a shot, starting with our inventors, Luca or Edgar?
I love Luca. I'm sorry, Edgar.
To be honest, I'd have to give it to Luca also. Like, she's
Really?
an actual
All right.
inventor. Yeah. Because you don't really see Edgar tinkering with anything. He just buys all of his shit. Like, Luca's actually making a time machine.
Yeah, I have a soft spot for Luca. So yeah, I gotta give it to Luca.
You know what? That's a fair point, because I was going to say a king with both a chainsaw and a literal burrowing castle is pretty badass. But you're right. He's just a spoiled rich kid. He's Iron Man without ever actually seeing him work on things. So I may have to change my answer and go Luca as well. Damn. All right. I could be wrong too. That's fine. Next up, compare or contrast. Cyan or Frog?
Oh no, I love Frog too much. I don't just love Chrono Trigger, but like Frog is just so good. But that's a hard one. Yikes. Yikes.
See, and this is where I'm going to split and go with Cyan, because his story was a little bit more fleshed out than Frog's.
That's
and
fair.
There's a child and a wife involved, where Frog only had his friend.
Yeah.
Which,
and an unrequited love with Queen.
His friend.
True.
I'll say, like, honestly, I would go Cyan with an asterisk for Frog's theme, because Frog's theme is the most like epic swashbucklery, like Cyan's theme. That is one of those themes that probably drove my dad's nuts, because I bought the 3 CD soundtrack that came out shortly after the game did, and that was probably the one song I played the most. But Frog's theme is still just something about it feels like builds and feels powerful.
Epic. Yeah.
Next up, compare or contrast. The team-up attacks or Magicite. As a game mechanic, which do you guys prefer?
I prefer the dual text personally, but I like the summons a lot because of how simple they are and easy to just use. But the dual text are just way more satisfying.
I didn't use the Magicite as much. What I did like about it, well, the Magicite as in the summoning aspect of it, I didn't use as much. But, like, just being able to augment your character's stats through the Magicite was an interesting mechanic that they introduced with 6, I believe. So, like, getting extra strength when you level up with Ifrit and stuff like that. It was kind of nice to be able to see that, like, oh, my characters are hitting harder. So, like, I would have to go with Magicite on this one.
That's fair.
That's fair. I think I'm with you on that, in that, like, not only is it a summon, but it's also a stat booster and, like, allows you to teach different magics, and the magics seemed themed around the creature. Like, I think both the storytelling and the gameplay mechanic combined, I really like a lot in that. But I will say, the dual and triple text are just so fucking cool. Dropping a giant frog on somebody is just a hoot and a holler. Like, it's awesome.
Give me that triple strike every time.
Yeah, yes.
Robo Frog and Chrono, let's go. We get something to
It's just an OP combo. Like, it's so good. All right. Setzer's airship or the Epoch?
Setzer's airship. I do love the Epoch, don't get me wrong, but the airship.
It's got a casino. It's got a
casino. Yeah.
It's a home base. I get that.
Listen, time travel is really cool, but you get the airship, you start flying a little sooner than you do in Chrono Trigger. And you get to go around. So, yeah. I'll give the airship on that one.
Fair enough.
Second the airship.
Beautiful. Yeah, I got a third that. The Epoch's neat and cool, and it's cool to have a sci-fi thing, but like, oh god, I always wanted a fucking, houseboat that flies. All right. The art style, and I'm talking about the sprites, I'm talking about the actual like book art of Akira Toriyama or Yoshitaka Amano.
Oh, jeez. So I liked the art of the game in Chrono Trigger better, but I love Final Fantasy's art more in general. But I might be a little biased because I'm not a huge Dragon Ball Z person.
Fair.
See, and I'm opposite. Like, Chrono Trigger's art style was beautiful, and if you played the Steam version of Chrono Trigger, the cutscenes, the animated cutscenes, like, I kind of wish they made an entire anime out of it. Like, I would watch the shit out of Chrono Trigger if it was an anime.
I think it'd make a great anime.
100%. 100%. And yeah, it's tough because I think I'm in that kind of opposite boat where I think in general the environment, the style, and the world of the game of Final Fantasy VI I think I like more. But I did say art style, and I do think, and I'm actually not a Dragon Ball Z person either. I feel Dragon Ball Z is very samey across the board. But when Akira Toriyama is going into fantasy, like when I'm as a DM, when I'm building fantasy worlds, I picture that, or I try to build that, the Akira Toriyama's like fantasy work, Blue Dragon, Chrono Trigger, as kind of like the more cartoony aspect of fantasy. I think I dig that more. Yoshitaka Amano's like stuff is beautiful. It's very sleek and slender, but it's always off-putting. It's always off-putting to me in the same way that like Aeon Flux is off-putting to me when I look at that art style.
Yeah, I do get that. I enjoy that sort of ethereal alien look, but it's not to say that I don't love like the Toriyamas, especially in Chrono Trigger and stuff like that. So yeah, I totally get it.
For sure. Next one, we kind of went into this, but I am actually curious on an overall scale. Soundtrack. Compare and contrast.
This was so hard because I like them for different reasons.
What are those reasons?
I think Chrono Trigger is better at the atmospheric soundtrack. So, like, each place is distinct. You immediately get in the mood from what the sound is and what the music is and stuff like that. But Final Fantasy VI, I think, has more easy listening music. Like, I could listen to that soundtrack while I'm just doing stuff. Chrono Trigger is much more almost like sound effect meets soundtrack, where it really, you can't separate it from the game. It has to be with it. While I think Final Fantasy VI, you could listen to that soundtrack about your daily life and be fine. So I can't. That's too hard to choose. So there's your compare and contrast.
Wow. All right, gonna back out. No answer. Okay, Lloyd, how you doing?
See, I think I would put my foot firmly in Uematsu's court because, like, his variety of music in Final Fantasy VI is so eye-opening to the story itself. While I will give credits to Chrono Trigger for being that atmospheric storytelling, like the bedrock of being able to tell those stories pretty much. like Uematsu just captures my imagination with all of his music. Like, I can't ever fault him in any way with any of the tracks he makes, because it just, ever since an early age, he's like just made my imagination go wild with these tracks. And like, I wish I could play in his orchestras and stuff like that. That just, it would make my life.
No, I mean, the band is in fact a legend. And I'm kind of in that same boat too. I love the music in Chrono Trigger. I think it's very good. But outside of like one or two songs, I don't remember them in the same way. They don't stick with me. I don't hum them in the shower. I don't, I'm not finding my lo-fi remixes when I'm at work of them in the same way that like. And of course, I think there is a little bit of nostalgia. And while I have built this podcast around the idea of trying to rip nostalgia away from actual review and retrospective, the soundtrack's one of those things I just can't. Like I said, I bought that 3-disc set to the point where I probably ripped the reflective tape or whatever on the bottom of the CDs, scratched it to shit because I kept using it. It's everything from the opera, the battle music, to the weird ragtime that happens, to whatever, in Zozo, whatever ends up sounding more like the opening, themes to the Jets versus the Sharks kind of. It's just a lot of that. There's something to that there. It's great. Last one, and I think we've kind of talked about this to the point where I probably know the answer here, but I do think they're comparable in some way. Chrono dying or Kefka winning?
I'm going to say Kefka winning. Like, that was a bigger impact on me than Chrono dying entirely.
Yeah,
like,
that's a hard one.
Because it sets up the entire rest of the game and the rest of the story.
Yeah, I have to say, like, despite the fact that I do find it fascinating that they let the whole Chrono dying thing, just because main characters dying just aren't usually heard of. As far as the impact on the game, I think Kefka winning has more of an impact overall in the game.
Do you guys think, because Chrono Trigger came out about a year after Final Fantasy VI did, and there are playing to compare it to, do you think that the success of the story beat that is Kefka winning has something to do with the story beat of Chrono dying? Lloyd, I think you were saying before that you felt like it wasn't absolutely didn't feel necessary. It just felt like it was in there. Do you think there's something to the fact that because they saw how well this moment was received, they were trying to find their next Kefka winning moment? Or do you think it's that whole thing is like it makes sense for Chrono to die and then come back, and that it does stand alone as like working?
Well, like, with Lavos being like this entity that basically is tearing the world apart, like, it's kind of hard to humanize it in a way. So, like, with him taking out Chrono, it's kind of like just a bear mauling him, if that makes any sense. Like, it's just a giant entity that doesn't really have its own mind, or you can't really understand it because it's an alien. So, like, it could have been influenced from Kefka's huge winning moment, but I don't think they would have. They didn't execute it right if that's what they were going for, in my eyes. Because if they really wanted to do something like that, they should have done that with Magus. An actual character within the game. So, like, I think Chrono dying to Magnus would have been a bigger story beat than Lavos doing it, in my opinion.
I feel a little differently, but here's the reason why. I do enjoy stories of fighting against a force of nature. I understand that it's not for everybody. I guess for me, like, and maybe this is the psychologist in me, it's sometimes hard for me to really, like, appreciate a character who's just this nihilistic force of nature like Kefka. I think it's a good story. I'm just saying sometimes I get a little with that, but I think a force of nature is scary because we can't understand it. It's so divorced from our understanding. It's like almost Cthulhu-esque. And so I think I appreciate those stories more. So to me, I see Chrono's death as this very like, how are we supposed to overcome this? You know, you can't stop a thunderstorm from being a thunderstorm. It just is one. And so to me, I see Chrono's death. While I'm not saying they did it, you know, very impactfully, I saw it very much more of this idea of this is a force of nature, but also in continuation of the timey-wiminess of, you know, going back in time and trying to save him through the time stream and things like that. I also have a soft spot for timeline kind of stories. I'm a huge Zero Escape series fan, so I'm all over that. So I guess to be fair, it was one of those like kind of my first like introduction to that sort of timeline jumping kind of thing. So it's different, but that's just how I see it. But that's also, again, I enjoy force of nature stories. So
I think it's fair. Do you think, Lloyd, question for you, do you think there would have been more impact if this was, instead of it being Chrono, if it was, say, Frog or Luca, a character who we grow attached to because they've had more of a personality by virtue of having lines of dialogue, but also, like, not meant to be us, right, the player, but actually someone that maybe you could feel could have been lost and shocked, in almost a Aerith dying in Final Fantasy VII kind of way.
To be honest, yeah, because like I've always been drawn to better characterizations in gaming, and Zelda's probably one of the biggest outliers for me with the silent protagonist, because Link is like an emotionless doll that you just like swing a sword with. There's really no character development unless you play like Breath of the Wild, which is the only one that does have character development for Link. But I've always had a problem with silent protagonists and trying to fit myself in there, because like I would rather experience a story of a character than try to make my own story in a game. Like if I was writing, I probably would never have a silent protagonist in any game, because it takes away from my ability to actually be engrossed in the game. So I think that's probably why I have such a big problem with Chrono Trigger, because I've been trying to insert myself in there and I just can't.
Fair.
So yeah, if
that's
Frog
totally
got
fair.
like murked, it probably would have hit me a lot harder.
No, yeah. I think so. Honestly, I think we're in the same boat too. Yeah, if it had been someone else, even if it was Magus that got murked instead of doing the murking, like, right, for sure. I think there's something to that. Hell, I felt bad when I lost General Leo, and only because he had such a powerful fucking move that I felt.
I know. Oh, I was so mad. I was like, wait, hold on a second. How's this guy dead? Yeah, for sure. And I do have to say, as a small aside, like I 100% agree with Lloyd as far as just like the silent protagonist thing. And I think this really hits home as a woman, because very often in video games, your silent protagonists are male characters. And so this idea of, in self-insertion has always been false to me as a kid, because it's never me, right? So yeah. I totally agree with that. I still like Chrono Trigger, but I 100%, I very much don't like silent protagonists for the exact same reason.
Are there any female silent protagonists in gaming?
Not that I've ever played.
Yeah, not that I can think of.
No, usually listen, Lloyd, you don't want me to get started on the Persona games. About how angry I am of them trying to make this like self-insert character that's got to be a straight guy. Let's not get into it. But that's exactly the issue. Like every time they do a silent or just even a quiet or even a muted, so they're not necessarily never talking, but they're like more muted. It's always a male character.
Yeah. No, I think that is. I think there's probably something to that. It's we aren't supposed to put ourselves in the place of a woman character. Where it's there's a lot that could be gotten from that, but the moment you do that, it becomes a game for women, and which is its own industry wide fucking problem. So I think it's antiquated. Zelda works maybe, but then again, like much like we were talking about earlier with Elden Ring, Zelda is environmental storytelling. So I don't know if it even helps with the story so much. If it's like, sure, I'm sure technically when you play the Sailor Moon beat 'em up game, those characters don't have lines of dialogue. Okay, fine. It's not they're not silent protagonists. There's just no talking in the game. So, all right, we've done our little compare and contrast. But now's the actual thing. Like, before we get into the rankings, and we still have to do the rankings, any final thoughts? Floodgates are open. We can talk about both games in relation to each other. Any thoughts to get out there?
Oh, jeez. Just that it's so interesting how these games have something similar, but yet so different takes on the RPG model.
Yeah.
And
I said Zelda. I was going to say Chrono Trigger tries to change. I feel like Final Fantasy VI perfects it, and Chrono Trigger tries to change it to improve upon it. And it's weird to see them both take those and be maybe not in our own eyes, but just in general, probably pretty equitable as far as how they've changed the game and how they're viewed in the greater world. By taking two different approaches to the genre. Yeah,
agreed. Also, I gotta give them both props. Pretty good female characters. Pretty impressed.
That's true. That's true.
I mean,
though Edgar now playing it back as an adult, Edgar's a piece of shit.
I know.
Edgar is absolutely a piece of shit.
So funny because I was playing it and I was like, God, I can't stand Edgar. And my wife, who played it a long, long time ago, so doesn't really remember, was like, oh, really? I thought he was pretty cool. And I was like, are you kidding me? I hate him.
No, that's exactly what hit me.
He grew on me, obviously, but man, was that rough at the beginning. And that's very old-fashioned kind of stuff. But,
it is. But there are moments where, like, even like Terra's like, oh, will anyone ever love me? Am I capable of love? Or like Sella's kind of constantly being the damsel. Like, there are some things that definitely, even if the characterization of the characters are great, that like story beat wise don't quite hold up.
Right, for sure. And I think the only reason Chrono Trigger works well on that is there just isn't as much content about that. Pretty much right, except for like the very beginning when you're helping out Marl, which, she's being erased from time. But even then, you have Luca with you. So like it's not like it's just the boys' team saving the one girl in distress. Even just Luca's existence, I think, is pretty unusual. And by that I mean usually the best friend is a guy character. And so making her a female character, I thought, was an interesting choice.
Yeah, a guy character or becomes a love interest, right? But I think you're absolutely right. Like Luca essentially passes the Bechdel test in a way that no other female character in any of these games do, even if they are great depictions.
Yeah. So it's interesting in that way. But regardless, I will say, compared to even some modern games, both hold up pretty well in some regards. Not everything, but overall, comparatively.
It's still 90s Japanese gender politics. Like we've seen anime, there's going to be issues. But yes, it's definitely, again, a standout. And like, it could have been a lot more dated. Could have absolutely been a lot more dated.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Oh gosh. So I have to say, that part actually genuinely surprised me. I had no idea. I knew about Chrono Trigger, but it's because there's not as much there to do. But I was actually genuinely surprised by 6. Despite some of the outdated stuff.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, all right, not bad.
Great, Lloyd. How about you? Final thoughts comparing these two games together?
It's a Sophie's choice between some of the best RPGs. So it's kind of hard to pick out. All I can say is if you haven't played either one of these games, just pick them up. They're on Steam. Give them a try. That's my final thoughts on it. It's like you like, you can't really experience gaming without, like, getting to the bedrock of where a lot of all these motifs in RPGs have evolved from. Like, it's just a learning experience for everybody. And they free advertisement free Square Enix for both your damn games. So.
They're a small company. They need it. I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to help them out.
They're a multi-dollar company.
I'll say this: if you get it, like I really enjoy the Pixel remaster of 6. I played a ROM of the Super Nintendo version, but I enjoy the Pixel remaster. Except I got it on the phone, and I would encourage anyone to not buy it for the phone, because even if you have like a backbone controller or something else, it only works with touchscreen controllers, which means you have to move by doing that with your finger.
No, thank you.
I was on an airplane with my phone, like holding tight, and like it is not. It's dumb, Square. It's fucking dumb. It's dumber than the font of most of your remasters. So like, don't do it. All right, now's the time to break in, rank these games, and get them on the list, guys. If you're first time listening, this is how it works. Myself and my guests are going to give these games a ranking, any ranking between 0 and 10 that they can only use once in perpetuity, meaning any future podcast, hell, technically any past podcast, they cannot use that number again. If I give Final Fantasy VI and I won't, I promise I won't, a 5, then that 5 is gone, out into the ether, never to be used again in any extra episode. Every ranking has to be better or worse than a previous ranking. There are no equals. Once we've given that, we're going to go ahead and take the average and see where it lands in the list. We have one chance to change a rating once. So if you don't like where something lands in the list, you want to move it, you have to pick which one and what score you're changing before it is locked, forever etched in stone like Moses with the tablets on the Tower of Gaming Stardom. This is the list. Let's jump in first with Chrono Trigger. And Sarah, I'm going to start with you. What are you giving this game and why?
I want to give it. Am I allowed to do it in comparison to your list or just individually?
Oh no. In comparison, preferably in comparison to the list. So like, if you think something's a 9, but you don't think it's as good as say Super Mario World, you should actually give it a number less than Super Mario World. It's about placement on the list, not about individual number.
Okay. I'm probably going to give this higher than all of y'all, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to give it a 7.54.
A 7? 7.54. Why is that?
Well, comparatively to the games on there. But also, I just think it's, I definitely, I always enjoy games that try to subvert typical tropes more than I like perfecting tropes. So, to me, I think that part of its uniqueness is really significant. And I enjoy the art quite a bit, and I think even the music is it's everything I've listed before. But yeah, I think also just I'm not sure if I'm ever going, even though I'm not a GoldenEye person, I'm not sure if it will ever be above GoldenEye just because of how iconic GoldenEye is, but I like it more than the other games below it. So
fair enough. Lloyd, how about you?
For Chrono Trigger, I'm going to have to give it a 5.6441.
A 5.6441.
The decimals are just to make it harder for you, but
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Oh, I'm giving it a higher score just to be spiteful. All right, so why 5.6441 outside of making my life a living hell?
because Chrono Trigger, while it's still a good game, it still has a lot of work. And if they ever came back to it, like, I'd probably give it a higher rating. But as it sits right now, like, it's kind of an average JRPG for me. So I'm going to give it an average score.
That's valid. I feel like I'm actually going to come out of left field here because I wasn't prepped for this. But when I think about these games on the list and where Chrono Trigger ranks among them, it's not my favorite RPG. It's not my favorite game in the world in general. But I do like it more than almost most of these games on this list. I'm giving it an 8.1.
All right.
Wow.
Shooting it back up to the top. I think, you know, part of what rates a game and what makes a game good is not just gameplay itself, but how a game makes you feel. And even coming back to it now, being familiar, being in a position where it's like watching The Sixth Sense. Like I already know the ending. Nothing can shock me about it now. It still just makes me feel in a way that a lot of games are fun. But game is an art. It's an art form, like movies, like books, like anything else. And in an art form, if it makes me feel something, it doesn't have to be fun. I mean, it does, but like if it goes beyond fun and actually makes me feel in a way that like Super Mario World is just a very fun game, then that's high points right there. Chrono Trigger absolutely makes me feel. So that locks that one in. You know, another game that made me feel was Final Fantasy VI. Lloyd, how did it make you feel?
That's a hard question. But I would probably rate it. I'd give it a high one.
Tell me how it made you feel on a scale between 0 and 10.
7.7777.
That's 4 sevens at the end? 7.7777? Yep. Beautiful.
Yep.
Being exact in this podcast means more than anywhere else. So, yeah, 100% important to have. Why 7.7777? And is that enough sevens?
Because that is enough sevens. Because sevens are really
Final
lucky
Fantasy
number.
6, ironically.
Yeah, okay. Ironically. And comparing it to the list, like, I wouldn't consider this game better than, like, Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, or Elden Ring in any regard, because those games are fantastic. But it's quite high up there. It's one of the better JRPGs ever made. And, like, it deserves a little bit higher than Chrono Trigger, in my opinion.
Okay. Sarah, how did Final Fantasy make you feel?
All right, let me think here. I almost wish I could have rated Trigger higher, thinking back, but that's okay. I'm going to make this all relative. I'm going to say for Final Fantasy VI, 6.969. I find that humorous, first of all. Second off, though, I think for me, I think about the feeling and aspect of that, and I do think I would have bumped these games a little bit higher with that alone compared to these other games, but I'm going to be the one that focuses on gameplay. And so for me, the Chrono Trigger gameplay was just more fun in general, but the Final Fantasy VI gameplay compared to some of those other games, as much as I loved the story, just a little bit not as high, but certainly I think an important top game, despite that.
Great. All right. If Chrono Trigger made me feel, Final Fantasy VI made me cry. tears of joy, tears of sadness. As a man, it made me in touch with my emotions. But I mean, honestly, I'm not a person who likes to revisit games. I don't. There are a lot of games that I'm very one and done. Breath of the Wild may be one of my favorite games of all time. I've only played through it once, and I don't have intention of playing it back. I'm going to play the fuck out of Tears of the Kingdom when that comes out, but I'm not jumping. Yeah, it's going to be amazing, but I'm not usually going back to that. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a game I will revisit once, twice a year. And Final Fantasy VI, when I want to open the equivalent of a good book, if I want to revisit a world like Dorothy did when she went back to the Wizard of Oz and the subsequent 17 books Frank L. Baum wrote afterwards, I absolutely would with this game. I am giving it an 8.39.
Right.
Again, it's just a game I am absolutely in love with. I do think it's got its flaws. I do think that like the actual gameplay of the combat, which is a big part of the gameplay, is not all that great. It doesn't hold up now. There's a reason why Final Fantasy still doesn't do time battles like this anymore, or like doesn't do menus, and they updated that for 7 and everything. But going past that, they just don't make stories like this. Like, it's still a story that holds up, and I want to come back to, and every time I do, I want to feel those same emotions I felt in my youth as a college kid on pot, and now as an adult with a job and no time to play video games. And this absolutely does it for me. So I could, as I mentioned in the beginning, I could do an entire podcast series on just Final Fantasy VI alone, and quite frankly, I could wax poetic on this forever, but our recording has already gone over 2 hours, and we do need to eventually end this, or no one will ever listen to how long it is. So, with that said, that locks in the list. We're going to go ahead and jump over the rankings. As of late, we have 28 rated games as of this episode, including our 2 today on the list. This list has started from our first episode where we did 10 and have continually grown it to the monster that it is slowly becoming. So I won't read through all of them, but I will say where our games land. And moving up in the number 12 spot, above God of War, but below The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, is Chrono Trigger for the Super Nintendo, with a score of 7.0947. Moving up further, amongst the top 10, but only in the number 7 spot, above GoldenEye 007 and below the running gag that has refused to go anywhere else in the world, WarioWare Microgames Inc. for the GameCube. It is Final Fantasy VI, 7.71223333. Guys, now we know where this lands. You have the option to change one score once to get the game in a place where you want it to be. How do you guys feel about where these have landed on the list?
I'm okay with Chrono Trigger.
Okay.
But I think it's a travesty that Final Fantasy VI is below WarioWare.
So do you want to raise?
I'm going to raise mine to an 8.1.
On Final Fantasy VI, you're going up to 8.1. Well, locking that in, 8.1? No backsies?
Yep. No backsies. That's my final answer.
It does, in fact, raise it above WarioWare Microgames Inc. It is now in the number 6 slot, 7.81966667. Above WarioWare and below TMNT, Turtles in Time. what is this? 4 of the top 6 games coming directly from the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. You've done your change, Sarah. How are you feeling looking at these? Is this fair? Is this where you think these games belong?
You know what? I'm gonna follow Lloyd's lead.
Yeah.
Just because I can. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right. So I think I said 7.54 originally
For Chrono Trigger.
for Chrono Trigger. Yeah. I'm gonna say 7.9.
7.9. All right. Locking that in. Final.
Go ahead.
7.9. That does absolutely bupkis. It's still above God of War. Below Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. 7.2147.
I don't know my math. That's okay.
It's fine because this puts me in a tough spot. Because I don't agree with where either of these 2 games are, and I think they both should be higher.
Well, you are the leader. You can cheat.
No. This is not. I can't cheat. Not when it comes to the opinion of everybody, ever in history. This is the defining list. You can't define the list by cheating. What is this, Vegas? So I gotta pick. Here's the truth. Is that I feel stronger about Final Fantasy VI being higher than I do Chrono Trigger. However, I feel Chrono Trigger is further from where it's supposed to be than Final Fantasy VI. So this is a conundrum. Now, I got to keep myself honest and not do the math. But I gave Chrono Trigger an 8.1. I'm looking at the numbers I've not used yet. And I'm going to try to bump this sucker up with a 9.2. And it's fallen into where Final Fantasy VI was. Chrono Trigger is now in the number 8 spot with a 7.58136667 above GoldenEye and below the dreaded WarioWare Microgames Inc. But that locks it in. We've made our decisions. We threw in our numbers, and the list is set in stone forever to be closed until the next time I come up with some other MacGuffin. But before we close that out, guys, this is your first time on the podcast. Mm-hmm. You've not had much of a say on this list. You're coming into a fresh list. That seems a little unfair, don't you think?
A little.
So, what if you had one opportunity to use now or at a later episode, should you come back, to change the number of any game on the list you haven't voted on yet? So let me be more specific. You are adding a score to the pre-existing aggregate score. So many of these already have 4 people who have voted in it. You would essentially come in with your number as the 5th vote if you feel the ranking of a certain game on here is unfair. Or you can hold on for a future date.
I personally was going to hold on. I don't feel passionate about the ones that are low on here. So I would have
I feel passionate about Wario. I
was going to say, can we add to lower? I guess it technically works. Okay, okay. I'll help you out, Lloyd.
Yeah, I want to rate that game. I don't want to be too unfair, but I think I would give it a 5.1111. Because I have played that game before.
Yeah, I guess I haven't played that game, so I really shouldn't vote on it. That's not nice.
It wasn't a very good GameCube game.
That's a little unfair, so I will keep my thoughts to myself. No.
I was making fun of it a lot, but you were not a fan of WarioWare Microgames Inc.?
I'm not a fan of WarioWare games at all. Like, all of them drive me nuts. They're annoying to play. But I like that one in particular ruined a blockbuster weekend for me.
All right, a 5.1111 added to WarioWare Microgames Inc.
All right,
Gonna lock that in using your card there. Wow, that is the biggest drop I've seen anything take, I think, since we started this podcast. WarioWare has now jumped down to the number 12 spot, above God of War, original God of War, below Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time with a 7.22756. Whoo, boy. That is exciting.
All right.
Sarah,
Yeah.
how do you feel about anything on this list? Anything fair, unfair, too high, too low?
No, I think I don't have any passionate feelings about anything else. I think everything else looks fair. I very much like that Final Fantasy 6 is at 6th place. I very much like that.
You know, the irony was lost on me.
Yeah, I know. I may like Chrono Trigger better, but having it be below is fine with me. So
And
I'm pretty good.
And honestly, in the end, they did fall right next to each other.
Yeah.
So even if I would say, even if I personally think they're both a little lower than they should be, I actually don't, because this is now my opinion. My opinion is the list, and I don't argue with the list. So I now think Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger are respectively the 6th and 7th best games in the world of all time, dare I say, to stick with the naming convention of the podcast. At least that is until we add more games to this list on a future episode. But until then, thank you guys for watching. Sarah, Lloyd, plug time. Go into it. What are you guys working on? Where can people find you all?
I know for me, you can definitely find me on Twitter under Sarahscopic, SARAHSCOPIC. I'm on a lot of D&D streams, mostly with my wife, Callie, Escalia, ESKALIA. You mentioned 2 of them that Lloyd and I in. I'm also in another one as well. So you can check those out. Otherwise, I'm trying to think. You can also catch me on another smaller podcast called Play on Ultra, which if you just type into Google, you will find. But yeah, if you really want to hit me up, Twitter is the best place under Sarahscopic.
Fantastic. Lloyd?
I'm on Twitter at LLOID_RNG. You can find me shit talking, political talk, but mostly I'm covering video game news on Let's Play Daily Gaming News, where you can get all of your gaming news in about 5 to 7 minutes every business day. So 5 days a week, all gaming news.
Great. Awesome. Yes, Noah, great, awesome indeed. What a great, awesome episode. What a great, awesome experience to get to sit down with Lloyd and Sarah and just gush over the beauty that is these 2 amazing Squaresoft games. These stories, really stories from my past that I'm just so attached to. God, yeah, no, it meant the world to be able to come back and revisit them. It was a lot of fun, and it was great to be able to talk about it. And I wish I could talk about it with more people. I want to shout how great these games are, but they're not the best games of all time. They are actually, I'm gonna break kayfabe here, so to speak. They are lower than I'd like, right? I recognize this is the list is all about deciding definitively what is the best game of all time and the rankings, what is truly better or worse than something else. And you heard me say it on the podcast. Both these games fell a little shorter than I think they needed to be. But I only had one change available to me. And as much as I would have loved to bump Final Fantasy VI even higher, as much as between the 2, that's the game I love more, I couldn't do it for society. I couldn't let Chrono Trigger be so far down on the list. I think it deserves better than that. I think so. I think that it's a service I did for myself, for you, for Michael Petrocelli, who will probably have our heads for making it as low as it is still. But it doesn't matter, because our opinions are set. We've made our decision, we've made our bed, and now we must lie in its 16-bit goodness. So what a wild ride, guys. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. Before we get into our closing bits, of course, we have our question of the month. I asked you guys, what was your Did I Make This Up video game? Right? That was the theme for last week. Did I make this up? Games that we remember, but it seems like no one else does. It's a fancy way of saying obscure, weird, ones that have fallen through the cracks in the radar. And we did get some comments on this one, which is great. I've seen a lot of really cool responses here. There were 2 on the YouTube page that I actually responded to, but I want to read a part of Wanted Rogue's response that I didn't respond to because I didn't realize there was a 3-dot ellipses that allowed me to expand the comment, and they had written so much more. They had mentioned both Metal Warriors and Front Mission for the SNES, which was great, but I want to talk about the section of his comment I didn't respond to, so that will be the picked answer that I'm reading out loud. And Wanted Rogue writes, another SNES game I liked that's probably obscure given it was only released in Japan is SD The Great Battle 4 and 5. Never played the first 3 though. They are both mainly side-scrolling platform type games, but you get to play as Kamen Rider, Ultraman, Gundam, or some original character to the series. Also, 5 is Western themed for some reason, and there's a story that unfolds as you play depending on which character you choose to play as, though I only ever played it in Japanese. Great get. I believe there are a number of the Great Battle SD games, because through emulation, I've been lucky enough, and fan translations, I've been lucky enough to play these, including Great Battle 5, the Western one. I was actually remembering this because my brother used to play this game a lot. And I was remembering this in my head. And I was like, what was the Wild West Gundam game? And I literally went through my entire, because I have a large collection of ROMs, went through my entire one by one, getting anything that maybe remotely resembled the name. I could have just freaking Googled it, but I didn't because I think I was just on an airplane and didn't want to buy the Wi-Fi. So go through and I found it. I found it literally just a week ago before I even read this thing, and started playing through it. And what a wild fucking game! It literally is. It's a Wild West platformer, but you play as these tokusatsu characters. Just bonkers. And they made 5 that are platforming games. Then there's also the Great Battle series that I think is a real-time strategy game, or a couple, also for the Super Nintendo, also combining all these characters together. Absolutely worth a visit. Absolutely something we'll have to jump to on this podcast, because it's a weird one, but it's also the pixel art's really good, and it's also a really good style. So yes, Wanted Rogue, I definitely am familiar with this one, and you are absolutely right. This was another one I was starting to think I made up because I could not remember even the name. What an on-point choice to bring for the comments here, and that's why I picked that one here. So that was last month's question. This month's question, what is your favorite story in gaming? Not game, right? I think there's a lot of great games out there, but specifically the story. What's the story that really sticks with you, that inspires you? That was Final Fantasy VI for me. Final Fantasy VI really inspired a lot of my creativity with gaming and why I do what I do, both on this podcast, in my day-to-day career, all of that. It put me on this path in some indirect way. So I want to hear from you. What is the video game story that means something to you, that inspires you? Go ahead and put that in the comments of the YouTube video, or you can leave it as a review on your favorite podcast app when you give us a review, because yes, you should give us a review. It helps the podcast. It helps lift up this crazy little thing we're doing and gets it into people's eyes and ears. Another way you can help is also by following me where I talk about this podcast and everything else on various social bits. It's Boss Monster Kaiju on just about everywhere, but Twitter, where it's Boss Monsta Kaiju, that's S-T-A, not S-T-E-R. Find me on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Twitch. I'm hoping to start streaming on Twitch again real soon. I've been gone for a little bit, but I've got a bit of a weekly thing I've been kind of trying to produce, and I'm hoping to have that by the time this podcast airs. And if not, well, then keep an ear out because it'll be sometime in that month. Next month, we got an exciting treat because the boys are back for part 2 of our Did I Make This Up topic, theme. I guess I can't call it a podcast, not an individual podcast, but yes, we are diving back in. I promised you the 4th and final part of this collection of games, and we are diving in. Patrick Malloy came to the table with none other than David Bowie's Dreamcast and PC epic, Omicron: The Nomad Soul. Yes, it sounds like I just threw a bunch of names together. No, I did not just have a stroke. That is a game. David Bowie stars as both an artist and as a revolutionary in Omicron: The Nomad Soul, and we are going to dive in to the good, the bad, and the weird of this game. So stay tuned. Follow me on socials. Follow this podcast so you don't miss that episode, and I will see you next month. Until then, stay cool, stay hip, stay heavy.
The Best Game of All Time is an independent production, hosted, produced, and edited by Noah Waterman. Theme music by Peter Rowland. If you want to learn more, go visit www.thekaijulounge.com.